Hello and welcome. Today is a sad day. What you're looking at is the dead body of an SLI rig I built a little while ago. You may have seen the video that I made about it. It was my first ever mess around with SLI. So it was socket 939 with a couple of GeForce 6600 GTs, and it was all fun, but it stopped putting out video for some reason. So I'm going to take this as an opportunity to build something a bit better with slightly more modern bits, and this is going to be my main XP gaming rig, so it's not going to be something I'm ever going to take apart and mess around with again. Hopefully it's just going to be something that I just sit down and play and never touch, so it needs to be able to deal with everything that XP can throw at it pretty much. So yeah, that's what we're going to build today. The weapon of choice for today is going to be this Asus P5NE SLI motherboard based around the Enforce 650i SLI chipset, and it's quad core ready. So I think there's a quad core chip on here. I'm not quite sure what it is. I know that it came with the board, but I haven't taken the cooler off to have a look yet. So that's quite a nice board. It's got standard Intel cooler on there for whatever the chip is that lies beneath. It's got a couple of gigs of DDR2. I don't know what speed it is, but the board takes up to DDR2 800, so that's what we're going to be using. We've got our funky little flip over card thing for our two PCI Express cards. These are PCI Express 16 slots, but because the chipset isn't the top of the range, the 650i, you can only run the two cards at 8 times PCI Express, so I don't think that makes much difference. I read a review of this board on Anandtech, I think it was, and they said that the sort of top of the range one was totally overpriced, and this board pretty much performs the same. So yeah, we've got some RAM here that we probably won't be using because it's ugly and we're going to be looking through a glass-sided case, so we want something that looks quite cool. Get this ugly cooler off, and we'll clean the gunk off and have a look at the processor in a moment. The motherboard has SATA, so I originally, in the old build for the socket 939, had an RD hard drive with XP. We're going to use that again, and we're going to clone it onto an SSD, so we don't have to worry about injecting SATA drivers at install time or anything like that, and we should just be able to use the drivers that come with the board software. So the processor is a Core 2 Quad 6600, 2.4 GHz, 8 megabytes of level 2 cache. Not the fastest thing in the world, but probably fast enough for what I'm doing, and obviously we don't need all these cores for XP. I gather this thing's quite a good little overclocker as well, so I might do some of that in the future. A while back on eBay, quite cheaply, I got two sort of reference versions of the GeForce 8800 GT, which is a nice card, and apparently even gave the higher up models a run for their money. The thing has 512 megabytes of GDDR3 RAM, a 256-bit bus width, and yeah, they should pretty much deal with everything Windows XP can throw at them, I'm hoping. I guess Crysis is going to be the ultimate test, though I think it did run on XP, but I think even that was more of a kind of Vista Windows 7 era game, but we'll see. We'll test out with that and some other games as well, but they look cool and they'll go nicely in this build. So for memory, shopping for DDR2 800, I found this. Now, I didn't know that this stuff existed. This is SLI ready memory. Widely regarded as a marketing gimmick. OCZ released this stuff. I think it just had a few tweaks on memory timing. It might have had some kind of XMP kind of profile type thing going on. I don't really care about that, to be honest. Possibly if I overclock the machine, I might look at fiddling with it a little bit more, or maybe do a comparison at some future date just to see if it did actually make any difference. But the main reason why I got this is the cool SLI logo on the chips, so that'll look rather nice because we're using a glass-sided case and we'll be able to see it. So the next thing I've got to deal with is this monster of a cooler I bought for the previous build on the socket 939 machine. I'm going to use it again because it came with a bunch of brackets, including one for LGA 775, so it should fit on this machine. Just have to figure out how to try and get that on, and this thing looks pretty bling, and I'm looking forward to seeing it in the case, and hopefully, I should imagine it would be more than adequate to cool this chip. So the case is the same one as the previous build. I'll put a link to the video if anybody wants to watch that, and should just be a case of dropping in the new motherboard. PSU's already in there, which is a modular OCZ 600 watt one, and then we'll have a think about cloning the hard drive and getting the ID one out and putting an SSD in instead. So all went in pretty nice, and I don't know if you see the other video, we've got some pretty funky LEDs going on here. All the fans are LEDs, the cooler's LEDs. We're just going to plug in the IDE cable temporarily just to boot up on the existing install of Windows XP, and then we can do our clone. I think that's pretty much everything in, so all that remains now is to power it up. We're just using a single card at this point. I just want to see if it posts, and if it does, put the other card in and see if we can get into Windows. Yeah, look at that. So at least it posts. It needs a battery as well, so I'll put one of those in and get the other card in. So of course we have to flip over our little cardy thing to switch it from a single to a dual GPU, and then we'll pop the other one in. You know, it always bugs me that they go to such effort to decorate the fan side of the cards, and they point down and you can't see them anyway. So it's a shame the motherboard's designers never sort of did it the other way. And kind of wondered if I could get some backing plates or make some backing plates for these and put some NVIDIA design on it or something like that. That might be a little project for the future. So there we are, already a rock and roll with 2 cards, and it posts with 2 cards, which is cool. So we just need to go into the BIOS and set the clock and all that kind of stuff, and then see if it continues on into Windows XP. Yeah, look at that, straight into Windows XP, so that install's still good, and now we just need to copy it onto the SSD. So one of the nice things about this board, I think it's the only board I've got, retro board, that has all of its documentation. So the board came with its user guide, super handy for your jumper settings and stuff. You don't have to go searching on the internet. You've got the quick start guide as well. If you're too lazy to read the manual, this would be where I would probably have gone and quickly, in fact I wouldn't have even read the manual. And then there's also a piece of paper which has just the diagram of the motherboard, which is kind of useful as well. But probably the best bit is we've got the original CD disc, so all the drivers to hand. Don't have to go searching on the internet, which is something I hate doing. One of the worst things of this hobby is having to go searching for drivers and then finding somewhere to keep them safe on a USB stick that you then never find again and all that kind of thing. So the chipset drivers are on. I've gone and got the Enforce drivers for the graphics cards. We'll get those installed now. And then that's pretty much it. Just really the graphics drivers and the chipset drivers are all we need. And then this install of Windows XP, which I hadn't put much on, so it should be pretty good to go. So I've already got some good XP games on there, so we'll compare those with how the 2 6600 GTs performed, and hopefully we'll see some big improvements. And despite the fact that the disk told me that it was a complete install, it wasn't. There were still some PCI devices weren't being detected, so I had to go in and manually install things like the RAID driver and the sound drivers. The little speech bubble popped up there saying SLI compatible system, so it's cool. It's recognized both the cards, so we go in, turn on SLI, and yeah, we now have the power. Right, I'm going to do some benchmarking now. I'm going to do pretty much the same as what I did for the original Socket 939 build, and with that I did 3D Mark 2005, I did Doom 3, and I did Company of Heroes. And the machine kind of did okay. It got some decent scores in Doom 3, and it was kind of around about 80-90 frames a second. Wouldn't run at all at 1600 by 1200. Company of Heroes got about 35 frames a second, and 3D Mark got a pretty rubbish score, to be honest. So we'll see if this machine does any better. We're also going to try Crysis at the end with this one because it should be able to deal with it. And we're going to start with 3D Mark 2005. So can this machine beat 3266? I just ran 3D Mark once at 1024 by 768 with 4 times anti-aliasing on just to see how it did. And yeah, look at that. So this one comes back with 11,010. So, you know, when you're talking there, more than 3 times, or around 3 times faster than the other machine. Okay, Doom 3. So I ran this at 3 resolutions, all on high detail, max detail, with 4 times anti-aliasing on. And to start with, it was 1024 by 768, and on the old machine, that got 97 frames a second. On this one, it got 143, so that's a pretty healthy increase. The next resolution I ran it at was 1280 by 1024, and the old machine got 86.4 frames a second, and this one, even faster at the higher resolution, it got 151.8. So I guess that's because as the resolution increases, the SLI starts to kick in, so I'm assuming that's what it is. 1600 by 1200, which wouldn't run on the other machine, 148 frames a second, so still faster than the lower resolution, but I guess again that's something to do with SLI, but pretty good results all around, all up around 150, so not bad. Company of Heroes was probably the most demanding thing I did with the other machine, and I ran this at 1024 by 768, and it gave average frame rate of 35.4. It actually states that's good, which I think is because it uses the cinematic cutscenes, which are probably more demanding than the real games, so you probably get more frames than that when you're actually playing it. But I got 108.8 frames a second with these two 8800 GTs, so that's a pretty good score. I didn't even bother going up the resolutions when I had the other machine because I didn't think it was worth it when I was already getting fairly close to minimal frame rates. But with the 8800s, I went up to 1280 by 1024, and it still got 113 frames a second. So again, a speed increase as the resolution goes up, so I guess that's when SLIs may be coming in and doing its thing, and the lower resolutions are really only just pushing kind of one card, so you probably don't get the benefit. All of that was done just using the IDE hard drive that was on the original install, so the last thing I really want to do to this machine is get rid of that and replace it with an SSD. So I've whipped out an old Integral 250 gig SSD from an old machine, and we're going to use that. And to begin with, I just went online and looked for some free sort of cloning software. I do have a copy of Norton Ghost somewhere, but I couldn't be bothered to go and look for it, so I think it was called Clone HD, the one that I got, which worked pretty nicely. Now there's a lot of people talk about things like worrying about trim and aligning partitions and things like that when you use an SSD with an older operating system. There are a couple of schools of thoughts on that from what I've read, where some people say, oh, wear your hard drive out if you don't set the trim properly and all of that, and other people say, well, it's modern hardware, your XP system is likely to die a long time before the hard drive will. So I'm just not going to bother with any of that stuff. This software that I've got, the Clone HD, has a paid version which does allow you to do trim and all that kind of stuff, but I don't care about that right now. All I'm going to do is clone it, leave it as it is, and I think that will be plenty performant enough for what I need, and I don't think I need to worry about the SSD dying before the motherboard does or anything like that. So that all went pretty painlessly. The drive was cloned. It took a good long while to clone, but it was recognized, and if we go into File Manager, we can see it's there. So we just need to unplug the IDE one and see if it all still works. The old IDE hard drive's out now, so we'll boot her up and see if it works. So this will be my first ever experience of running Windows XP off an SSD, and yeah, look at that. Everything's funky. I didn't notice any speed increases, but yeah, there you go. It's solid state, that's all that matters. That's that. The build is complete, so I'm going to secure the SSD just using some of these little sticky back pad things, little foam pads, so it's just going to sit flat against the back of the case next to the RAM, and all I really need to do then is to put everything away, so a bit of cable tidying at the back, put the rear lid on, give the glass front a bit of a polish, make sure there's no big splurgy finger marks on it, and close it all up, and the system should be complete. I do really like the way this build looks. It's this case I first used, I think, for an Athlon Thunderbird kind of reverse sleeper, but the interior has gradually got more modern as time has passed. But yeah, I do like the way it looks. I'm going to have a lot of fun playing this. I don't think I'm going to do much else to it ever. I just want to put it on my desk and kind of just play on it and never have to mess around with it. Whereas I do prefer on the older machines to be constantly messing around and benchmarking and trying different graphics cards and stuff like that, just for the hardware fun of it. But this is just going to be for playing games on and looking cool, because it does. It looks damn cool. But now for the ultimate truth. Does it play Crysis? Does it play Crysis? We'll find out in just a second. Crysis has a couple of built-in benchmarks. It has one for GPU and one for CPU. I'm just going to look at the GPU one. It's only really frame rates you care about, and I never really knew about Crysis, and it's demanding. Everybody knows that the question, does it play Crysis, from this kind of era of gaming, but it totally passed me by. I don't know what I was doing. I think I was playing World of Warcraft and didn't really look up from that for a few years. I didn't really know anything about Crysis until I built an i5 Haswell much later, and it was Crysis 3 by then, and everybody would say, does it play Crysis 3? So that was the first I heard of all of this Crysis stuff, and I got it for my Haswell. It's the only one of the games I've actually played. Shooters aren't really my thing, but I did enjoy it, and that machine did handle it fairly well. So this benchmark I ran was at 1280 by 1024, and I only, just to give it a bit of a break, only put on 2 times anti-aliasing, and it did pretty damn well. It was getting kind of around 45, 50 frames a second for the most part. The minimum frame rate's probably the ones you really care about, but it was around 30, so just still kind of playable. And so yeah, I mean, it must have been a pretty intense game for a setup like this to, it isn't running at hundreds of frames a second. It's running at a totally playable frame rate at high detail, so it should still be an enjoyable play. And yes, it does play Crysis, I think we can safely say. So it's in its final resting place now. This is actually my work desk, which takes up far too much space that should be fun space. So the idea here is to get a permanent Windows XP machine up there, which I've got. Looks rather cool. I've got my 4.3 gaming monitor there that I keep up top and just lift down when I need to play it. I also plan to build a Windows 98 machine to go up there as well, so basically all my DOS, Windows 9X and Windows XP gaming will be catered for on these 2 machines. Get some voodoo goodness going in there for some glide as well. And yeah, these machines are just going to, once they're built, they're just going to stay up there and just get used for gaming and nothing else. And yeah, I love the way this machine looks. What can I say? It's fab, and its performance is also equally fab, and I'm really pleased to have it. I guess that's pretty much it. I'm really pleased with the way the build's turned out. I think it's a very stable build. I think it's going to give me a good few years of Windows XP gaming. I really enjoyed building it. I hope you enjoyed watching me build it, and be back for the next video fairly soon to do the same with Windows 98 and DOS, so I hope you join me for that one as well. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.